Good morning. This is Shelby Law with the Great Basin Fire Potential Briefing for Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. Fire potential impacts for the next few days continue to include wind. For today, we have some gusty winds over the central Idaho mountains with gusts up to 35 to 40 miles an hour. And then in Nevada and up into western Wyoming, still some gusty winds, but a little bit lower. Maybe an isolated storm today in the higher elevations of central and southern Utah, but very isolated, very small chance. Tomorrow, there's a small chance of an isolated storm on our far northern border in the central Idaho mountains. Otherwise, gusty winds move into the eastern and southern portions of the Great Basin in southern Nevada and up through western Utah and western Wyoming. And then we'll see winds continuing in those same areas on Friday. Temperatures still remain well above normal for the time of year. Yesterday we had a little more activity with some storms in southern Nevada and this little cluster here in north central Utah. Very light precip amounts with any of these storms. Initial attack for the last 24 hours showed 5 fires for 144 acres, and large fire growth continues to be quite significant with over 32,000 acres burned on our large fires. We continue to be in this warm and dry weather pattern. Again, no precipitation virtually anywhere in the last 2 weeks, and this puts us way outside of climatology for the time of year. ERCs remain high in many of the same areas over southern Utah, through much of the state of Utah, really up into western Wyoming, Idaho, and along the Sierra Front. So ERCs are quite a bit above normal for the time of year, and in many areas starting to set records. This morning's satellite imagery shows generally high pressure in place over the southern portions of the Great Basin, but we do have this trough moving into the Pacific Northwest, which is increasing winds for the next couple of days over the Great Basin. Unfortunately, this trough will not be moving into the Great Basin, will not be bringing any kind of precipitation, but will knock down temperatures with a dry cold front. Smoke for today. The impacts with the southwest winds today and tomorrow are going to indicate smoke moving off to the north and east. And we even have some smoke coming up into the southern portions of the Great Basin from Mexico. Again, this afternoon, we do have high risk issued for much of Idaho, Wyoming, and northwest and western Nevada for those gusty winds ahead of that dry cold front in the Pacific Northwest. The strongest winds will be over the central Idaho mountains today, with those gusts up to 35 miles an hour or so, 35 miles an hour or so. Slightly lower winds over western Wyoming, northern and western Nevada, but still breezy and dry. Minimum relative humidities will be in the low to mid-teens across many of our lower elevations, only slightly higher over the central Idaho mountains, western Wyoming, and northern Utah, with those values around 20%. More of the same is expected on Thursday with continued winds. Now the winds shift a little bit further south and east into eastern Nevada, western Utah, and up into the northern Utah mountains as that little trough slides to the east. Gusty winds again with wind speeds 25 to 30 miles an hour over Nevada, much of Utah, and up into western Wyoming, but the winds do lighten up a bit over the central Idaho mountains on Thursday with the passage of that dry cool front. Minimum relative humidities do come up a bit over the central Idaho mountains, with those minimums popping up into the low 30s, but the air mass remains quite dry over Utah and Nevada. Temperatures today will be quite warm, still 10 to 12 degrees above normal for the time of year, with highs in the mid-80s. On Thursday, with the passage of that dry cool front, temperatures drop a bit into the mid-70s across the north, but still remaining quite warm over Utah and Nevada. On Friday, the winds remain quite breezy over the Sierra Front, eastern Nevada, western Utah, and up into western Wyoming, and the north central Utah mountains as well, as there's another trough setting up off the coast, continuing to bring breezy winds into the area. So again, another breezy day for eastern Nevada, much of Utah, up into western Wyoming, and winds do start to pick up a bit over the central Idaho mountains again on Friday. Minimum relative humidity staying somewhat elevated over the central Idaho mountains, but still very dry in general, no precipitation, and still quite low relative humidities over Utah and Nevada. No precipitation really expected for the next 3 days, other than maybe some cloud buildups and a very isolated storm here or there. On Saturday, the low starts to move inland over southern Oregon, keeping winds breezy over the southern Great Basin, eastern eastern Nevada into west central Utah. This low is not expected to bring any precipitation to the Great Basin, just some continued winds. And the low continues to move into western Nevada on Sunday. Again, just really keeping things dry and breezy across the basin. On Monday, the high pressure ridge builds mainly into the west, but we still do see this cutoff low hanging out over Nevada. This may allow some isolated storms to move into eastern Utah as we head into the first part of next week, but the models aren't. There's not high confidence in that solution just yet. Otherwise, dry everywhere. And as we head into Tuesday, that low opens up, kind of moves through the flow. Again, maybe we'll see some storms into northeast Utah on Tuesday. And other portions of Utah, we'll just have to wait and see. It's a little far out as our models are not having a lot of consistency this time of year. It does look like there's another trough starting to set up over the Pacific Northwest, but we'll just see if that one actually comes to fruition. Otherwise, really no precipitation in the forecast, just some hints of maybe some light precip possible early next week as that little cutoff low tracks into eastern Utah. The extended forecast keeps things warm across the Great Basin, but we do start to see some hints. Maybe there's a little bit of confidence that something will move into the Pacific Northwest and finally bring some cooler temperatures and some precipitation. And hopefully that means we'll get some in Idaho as well. This concludes today's fire potential briefing. Please check back tomorrow for the latest updates.